Hello everyone. It's been a little while, and like I said, I moved recently. I don't have a complete setup for everything, so I apologize if the audio sounds a little off. But I figured I would hit you up with a shorter video, and that's going to be my impressions on Metroid Dread. If you listen to our E3 podcast, you know that this was kind of the highlight for me. This is the first new 2D Metroid game to be released in 19 years. Finally advancing the timeline of Metroid after the events of Metroid Fusion. It's been primarily made by Mercury Stream, which is the same developer that did Samus Returns a couple of years back. So if you played that game, you're going to feel right at home here, although it definitely is more of its own thing. It has much more of its own identity. And for starters, I don't really think Samus has ever felt this smooth to control. I honestly think that this really elevates a lot of the combat and movement in this game above some of the older entries. There are maybe a few button inputs that I would have changed. The buttons aren't quite where I would like for them to be, but for the most part, you could do a lot of complex actions very quickly and chain them together, and you're really going to need that because this game is very challenging. Getting hit will cost you a lot of health, which is sort of the way things worked in Samus Returns, but the bosses in this game, they are not slouches, especially near the end. You are going to really become a master of dodging by the time you have beat this game. So I will say that if you're not a veteran of 2D action games, you might want to think about this. This might be a little too tough for you to start out with, unless you do enjoy the increased challenge. For me, that was the main draw, though. I really loved how challenging this game was, and I was very satisfied whenever I would beat a big boss, and getting to the end, it was really just a rush, and I enjoyed that a lot. Now, a lot has been said about the encounters with the Emmy Robots, which I think are obviously there to add some horror elements to the game, and I think they mostly succeed. They're a lot like dealing with Mr. X or any of the other Resident Evil monsters that are invincible that you have to run away from. I think they really capture that feeling, and I appreciate it. It's a change of pace from what otherwise is the kind of Metroid gameplay that you know and love. My only criticism is that I would have liked to see more variety with them, because most of the encounters with these robots, they don't really implement puzzles. There's only a few that do that, so I would have liked to see more of that. Most of it is just running away and hiding, and there isn't anything past that. Of course, we should also talk about the design of the world, because that's key to these kinds of games. And the art direction is pretty good. I think every area has a lot of detail, looks nice, looks different from what we've seen in other games, so I appreciate that. But I think some people are going to be a little torn because as far as world design, it's certainly not as challenging as the boss battles. The game tends to funnel you into these one-way paths for extended periods of time. You'll realize that you can't go back even if you wanted to. You have to press forward. So it might make the levels not feel as vast and open as you might expect. I'm a little back and forth on this, because I like that things are very focused. You can't backtrack and then get lost, and I think that's what they were trying to avoid, because there's no objective markers or anything like that in this game, so I could definitely see players who don't play a lot of Metroid games getting lost. So what they did instead was, you kind of go down slides a lot. You go down a slide, but you can't climb back up. So you know that the way forward is the correct path, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be difficult to find that way forward, because it's going to be hidden somewhere. So the game has more focus to it in that sense, and I personally liked that. I don't know if it's the way I would want things to be all the time, and I do think that this approach, it's less linear than some other Metroid games. I think it's certainly less linear than Fusion. But once you get certain abilities and go backwards, you absolutely can use those new tools to open up a lot of those one-way paths. So backtracking is still a very smooth experience, and you can open up the levels in ways you didn't realize you could. So that aspect of Metroid, I think, is definitely preserved. And Mercury Stream obviously knows what Metroid is here, because in this game, a lot of effort was taken to subvert the expectations that you would have of a 2D Metroid game at various points. The most obvious, which you've probably seen people talk about, is that it's going to take a little while before you even get the Morph Ball, and they do some clever things with a few other abilities later on as well. Maybe there aren't as many brand new abilities as I would have liked, but even some of the old abilities feel fresh the way they've been implemented in this game, and that's pretty cool. I also think this game lives up to expectations when it comes to the story as well. Even after 19 years of people arguing on message boards about what was going to happen after Metroid Fusion, I think that this, in some ways, delivers on what I was hoping for, but it also does things that I didn't expect at all. It's great to finally have a game that focuses on the Chozo, and it brings certain elements of Samus's character into the forefront in a manner that's very respectable. In a lot of ways, this game's a conclusion, but it's also a new beginning, and I'm very excited to see what could come next. Now, this isn't to say that everything about the game is awesome, because there is one area where I think there are definitely some shortcomings, and that's going to be the music, sadly. The music sounds cheap. It's atmospheric, but especially when you're in the boss battles, there is a very cheap tinniness to a lot of the synth instruments that you will hear, and I kept getting flashbacks to computer games from 20 years ago, and not in a nostalgic way, in a, wow, these sound cheap and inadvertently funny way, because it reminded me of games like Lego Racers, of all things. It's a little disappointing because Kenji Yamamoto, he's credited as the music director, and he's done a lot of the music for the Metroid series, but it seems like most of the music was actually done by two other composers who, they don't really have a lot of credits on their name, sadly. And I really do think that if more attention was paid to the way these music tracks sound, it would go so much further towards improving the overall soundtrack. I don't think the soundtrack is terrible, but it definitely could be better. Outside of that, I'm very happy with Metroid Dread. It feels great to finally have something catapult this franchise into the future. There are absolutely plenty of smaller developers out there making great exploration-based games in this style. And while I've played many of those games and I respect them a lot, none of them have that je ne sais quoi that is Metroid. And so it's great to have one of the originators of this style back and hopefully in the limelight. My hope is that Metroid Prime 4 can also land on its feet, wherever that game is, and it can carry the other half of this series back into relevance. But I also wish great things in the future for Mercury Stream, because whether they're going to be working on more Nintendo IPs or something else, this is a company that I think is really proving themselves thanks to their work on Metroid. So I definitely disagree with Kotaku here. Please legally purchase a copy of Metroid Dread, and hopefully we can see more of this stuff in the future, because this is a franchise that's been away for a long time, and I'm very happy to have it back. I think it's delivering, and I think there is still so much potential for Metroid in the future, and Dread is a great indicator of that. So that's all I really have to say about it for right now. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you are not. The next review subject has been determined, so I'm going to try to start the recording process for it. It is not a game I've really played much of before, but I figured that it would be a good pick. It's kind of a cult game from over 10 years ago, I believe, at this point. And sadly, I don't think it's ever been re-released or anything, so it might be a diamond in the rough for some people. That's at least the reputation that it has. But if you'd like to see me review other games that Mercury Stream has done, let me know, because they actually have more of a catalog than I thought they did, and I think they could be an emerging player in the market. So again, that's all I've got. See you later.